Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take all that source material you send us, the articles, the data, all of it, and we really just pull out the core of what you need to know.
Right. We're trying to find those aha moments, the connections that aren't immediately obvious, and, skip the overload.
And today, we're taking on a place that I think everyone recognizes. It's often romanticized, but it is, I think, profoundly misunderstood.
Absolutely. We're talking about the state of Wyoming.
Exactly. I mean, when you hear Wyoming, what do you picture? You think Yellowstone,
Right.
the Tetons, maybe that cowboy on a bucking bronco.
The classic silhouette.
But the source material we've got today, it just reveals a state of massive inherent contradiction. We're talking about a land that's huge, the 10th largest in the Union, but at the same time, it's the absolute least populous.
So our mission today is really to get past those cliches. We need to define this place not just by its mountains, but by its history, which is.
Yeah.
It's a history of some pretty radical legislation.
And its unique financial practices today and its role as this energy powerhouse.
So we're connecting the dots.
We are. How does a place called the Equality State, which has this incredibly progressive historical foundation, how does that same place operate today as, a conservative fortress built on resource extraction?
And now, as this emerging hub for corporate secrecy and even cryptocurrency, it's a fascinating tension.
The data we have really helps us unpack that.
And it all starts with that historical identity. I mean, that's where the paradox begins. The official nicknames are the Cowboy State and, more officially,
The Equality State.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the motto is just simply equal rights.
And you really can't overstate how powerful that motto was and is. Today, Wyoming is synonymous with this rock-ribbed conservatism, and we'll definitely get into that.
Well, yeah.
But its progressive past is foundational to its entire existence.
It truly is. This wasn't just, a little historical footnote. It was a defining political act. We're talking 1869. The U.S. territory was barely even established.
Right.
And the territorial governor, John Allen Campbell, he signs legislation extending the right to vote to women.
Making Wyoming the first territory in the entire country to grant women suffrage.
The first. And the critical point here, and this is my favorite part of the story, when Wyoming applied for statehood in 1890, Congress actually tried to make them get rid of it.
They tried to force them to revoke the suffrage provision.
Right. And Wyoming famously refused. They sent a telegram back that basically said they'd rather stay out of the Union for 100 years than come in without the women.
An incredible moment of sticking to their principles.
And they stood their ground. They were admitted as the 44th state. They kept that constitutional commitment, making it the first state in the nation to grant women full voting rights.
And this was decades before the 19th Amendment. I mean, they were so far ahead of the curve.
And it wasn't just the vote. The sources point out that Wyoming was also the first state to grant women the right to actually hold elected office.
Setting a precedent for the entire country.
The momentum just kept going. They elected the first female governor in U.S. history, Nellie Taylor Ross.
A Democrat, which is interesting in its own right, elected in 1924.
Yeah, she took office in 25, stepping in after her husband, the governor, died unexpectedly. But still, it's a remarkable timeline.
It is, from first ever voting rights to first female governor, all coming from this small, pretty isolated place.
And that initial boldness, that willingness to just define itself against the norm.
That's the thread. That's the thread we're going to follow all the way through to its modern day approach to things like crypto and corporate law.
Okay, so let's unpack this monumental state, geographically speaking. You mentioned its size. Over 97,800 square miles, 10th largest in the country.
Right, and it's completely landlocked in the Mountain West, sharing borders with Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado.
The sheer space of it is just central to its whole character. You see it right away in how its borders are drawn.
Oh yeah, the geographical box.
The quadrangle anomaly. It's such a fascinating detail about 19th century mapping. I mean, Wyoming is famous for being one of only 3 states. The others are Colorado and Utah, whose borders are defined only by straight lines.
Just a big rectangle on the map.
Theoretically, yes. 4 lines of latitude and longitude, 41 degrees north and 45 degrees north, and then 2 lines of longitude.
But I have to imagine that trying to survey a perfect rectangle across mountains and high plains in the 1800s was, well, not easy.
It was a nightmare, and that's where the anomaly part comes in, the legal border. It doesn't actually match the coordinates perfectly.
So it's not a real rectangle.
Not a perfect one. Because of the surveying inaccuracies back then, the actual boundary line deviates from true latitude and longitude by a half a mile in some spots.
Wow, so practical reality just kind of overrode the map makers.
Exactly. So once you're inside that slightly wobbly box, what do you see?
You see that classic American contrast, the Great Plains meeting the Rocky Mountains.
The division is really clear. The western half of the state is all mountains, towering peaks, huge rangelands. The eastern half that transitions into the high plains, which is basically high elevation prairie.
But it's all high. Calling it a plateau is really the key, right? It's a huge elevated surface that's just broken up by all these mountain ranges.
And the elevation itself is extreme. That's what gives you those incredible views, but also the crazy climate.
Just look at the difference between the highest and lowest points. It's more than 10,000 feet.
Right. Gannett Peak, which is the highest point in the Wind River Range, is 13,809 feet.
And the lowest point?
Down at 3,100 feet, where the Belfourche River flows out into South Dakota.
So which mountain ranges are really defining the state's character?
Well, in the northwest, you have the Tetons. Unmistakable. Grand Teton is the second highest peak and one of the most recognizable mountains on the planet.
Sure.
Then you have the Wind River Range, which is geographically massive. It has over 40 peaks that are higher than 13,000 feet.
40. That's incredible.
And then you've got the Bighorn, the Laramie, the Snowy, and the Sierra Madre ranges. And these aren't just, pretty backdrops. They dictate everything. Water flow, where the minerals are, where people can live.
And speaking of water flow, this brings us to one of the most unique geological features, something that really symbolizes Wyoming's isolation.
This is a perfect deep dive moment.
The Continental Divide and the weird exception it creates there.
So we all know the Continental Divide, right? It separates water that flows east to the Atlantic from water that flows west to the Pacific. In Wyoming, it runs right through the middle of the state.
So you have rivers like the Yellowstone and North Platte heading east.
And the Snake and the Green Rivers heading west.
Mm-hmm.
But in the south-central part of the state, the divide does something really strange. It doesn't just pass through. It forks.
It splits into two.
Exactly. The Continental Divide splits, and it creates this unique hydrological basin called the Great Divide Basin.
And what does that mean practically if you're standing in it?
It means that any water that falls there, rain, snowmelt, whatever, it's trapped. It collects in the soil or in these little temporary lakes, and it just evaporates. It has no outlet. It never reaches an ocean.
So it's water that's born and dies entirely within Wyoming.
It is hydrologically a closed system, a true cul-de-sac of water.
That is just profound, and I have to assume that kind of isolation shapes the climate.
It absolutely does. The general climate is classified as semi-arid and continental.
Mm-hmm.
It's what's known as a BSK classification.
For those of us who don't have the climate chart memorized, what does BSK mean?
It means it's a cold, semi-arid climate. So low precipitation, high altitude, and much greater temperature extremes than you'd find further east. It's fundamentally dry and windy.
How dry are we talking?
Extremely dry. Much of the state gets less than 10 inches of rain a year. I mean, that's approaching desert conditions.
Wow.
Especially in lower areas like the Bighorn Basin, which only averages about 5 to 8 inches.
And yet they get these incredible temperature swings.
The swings are legendary. It's not uncommon to see a 40 or 50 degree Fahrenheit change in a single day. And the historic extremes are just brutal.
What's the record, Huck?
A blistering 114 degrees Fahrenheit back in 1900.
And the low.
A staggering minus 66 degrees recorded in 1933. It is a place of absolute endurance.
And I guess that rugged mountainous terrain at least shields it from some of the more dramatic weather you see out on the Great Plains.
For sure. Tornadoes, for example. The incidence of tornadoes just drops off a cliff as you move west into the mountains.
So the southeastern corner might see some action, but that's about it.
Right, near Cheyenne. But even then, the tornadoes that do form are usually small and brief, nothing like what you'd see in Oklahoma or Kansas. The real meteorological drama in Wyoming is blizzards, intense cold, and just constant powerful wind.
So we have this massive, rugged, isolated, and climatically harsh territory. And now we bring in the human factor, which ironically is really defined by its absence.
The scarcity of people is the key demographic fact about Wyoming.
It is the defining statistic. The estimated population in 2024 is just 587,618 people.
Right. That makes it the least populous state in the entire U.S.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The entire state's population is less than the city of Milwaukee.
And it's the sparsest populated of the contiguous states. Only Alaska has a lower population density overall.
And that 500,000 plus people, they're not spread out evenly, are they?
Not at all. They're heavily concentrated. Back in 2020, over half of all Wyomingites lived in just the 12 biggest towns.
And what are those main population centers?
The capital, Cheyenne, is the largest city with about 65,000 people. Then you have Casper with around 59,000.
So pretty modest cities for such a huge state.
Very. And they reflect that historical development along the railroad route.
And the state's population growth. It's incredibly volatile. It's tied directly to its economy.
Absolutely. We saw a really stark example of that between 2015 and 2016. The state had its first population decline since the 90s.
And what caused it?
It was immediately tied to a downturn in the mineral extraction industry, specifically job losses in oil and gas. The state's demographics literally rise and fall with the global price of its commodities.
What about the human origins? What does the census tell us about where people came from?
It's a historically European-American state, heavily settled by pioneers. The 2000 census showed the biggest ancestry groups as German, English, and Irish.
And a small but very important American Indian minority.
Right, at about 4.7%. And not surprisingly, English is spoken by over 93% of the residents.
So let's take a step back and talk about the original inhabitants of this land before the pioneers.
The region was home to several significant Native American tribes. We're talking about the Arapaho, the Crow, the Lakota, and the Shoshone.
And the territorial claims themselves reflect all those 19th century conflicts and treaties.
For sure. Southwestern Wyoming was originally claimed by Spain, then it was part of Mexico. It was only ceded to the U.S. after the Mexican-American War in 1848.
And the rest of the land came from the Louisiana Purchase and the Oregon Treaty.
Right, which brings us to one of my favorite historical anecdotes from the sources, the fact that this land was so unbelievable to people back east.
That the first reports were literally dismissed as made-up stories.
The fictional discoveries of Yellowstone. It's just fascinating. John Coulter, who was a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition, he first documented the area in 1807.
And he described what he saw: boiling mud pots, steaming earth, geysers.
And later, the famous mountain man Jim Bridger explored the same area and reported similar things.
And the sophisticated people on the East Coast just thought they were either drunk or lying.
They absolutely dismissed the reports as tall tales. They just couldn't conceive of a landscape that was so volcanically active and bizarre.
So what changed their minds?
It took detailed government-sponsored expeditions in the 1870s to finally verify the claims. And that's what led directly to the creation of Yellowstone National Park in 1872.
The world's first national park.
The world's first. And it cemented Wyoming's unique place on the global stage of conservation.
The history of just moving through Wyoming is really the story of American expansion, isn't it? The pioneer trails defined where people settled.
Yes, the Oregon, Mormon, and California trails all intersected and crossed this territory. They established vital points like Fort Laramie. But the single most important development was the Transcontinental Railroad.
The railroad just changed everything.
It did. In 1867, the Union Pacific Railroad basically made the slow, dangerous wagon trails obsolete. And crucially, its route went right through southern Wyoming.
Using the Bridger Pass.
A route that had been documented by Jim Bridger decades earlier. And this corridor led to the founding of key towns, including Cheyenne, which became the capital.
And what's really amazing is that the exact same route was later used for Interstate 80.
90 years later. It's a remarkable piece of continuity, all dictated by the landscape itself.
So the territory was established in '68, and then Wyoming officially becomes the 44th state in 1890, a development that, as we said, hinged on them keeping women's suffrage.
And tying back to the geography, we have to talk about the scale of federal land ownership. It impacts everything.
How much land are we talking about?
The federal government owns just under half of the entire state, about 42.3%.
Which puts Wyoming 5th in the country for the proportion of federally owned land.
Right, and this land is managed by the National Park Service, the Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management.
And it's not just Yellowstone and Grand Teton.
Far from it. You have those, of course. But you also have Devil's Tower, which was the first national monument in the U.S., and Fossil Butte National Monument, which has these pristine, ancient fish fossils.
And this public ownership, it protects the land, but it also creates this constant political tension.
It does. A constant push and pull between state officials who want more local control and federal agencies that are tasked with managing these huge tracts of land.
And finally, there's the Wind River Indian Reservation, which is a critical piece of land ownership and sovereignty in the state.
This is a complex history. It's located in central western Wyoming, near Lander. And it's jointly administered by the Eastern Shoshone and the Northern Arapaho tribes.
And it's sovereign, self-governed land.
Right. The two tribes share a 50% interest in all the land, water, and resources. But that joint arrangement, that wasn't the original plan.
What happened?
In 1868, the reservation was initially established just for the Shoshone. But then the Northern Arapaho were forcibly relocated there in 1876 by the federal government after officials failed to give them the separate reservation they had been promised.
So this historical injustice resulted in the current joint use system.
Yes. And today it serves thousands of tribal members and covers a vast, resource-rich area.
All right, let's shift gears and dive into the modern economic reality of Wyoming. This is where the contrasts really, really sharpen. You have the state leveraging its rugged, earthbound resources on one hand.
And on the other, these cutting-edge, almost intangible financial tools.
It's a tension that just defines the modern Wyoming economy.
It does. The wealth comes from the ground. But the state's political identity is increasingly defined by the financial maneuvering that's allowed off the ground. The economy is all about tourism and mineral extraction coal, natural gas, oil, and trona.
Let's start with that traditional engine, mineral production. Coal, even with its national decline, is still a giant here.
It is globally significant. Wyoming has a massive reserve of 68.7 billion tons of coal.
And production peaked pretty recently, didn't it?
Yeah, in 2008 at a staggering 514 million short tons. Now, production has dropped a lot since then, down to 277 million in 2019, but the sheer scale of the operation is still unparalleled.
And the Powder River Basin is the heart of that, right?
It is. The Powder River Basin is famous because it contains the North Antelope Rochelle mine, which has the largest estimated coal reserve in the entire world.
And Wyoming coal has a specific quality that made it desirable.
Right. It's lower in sulfur, so it burns cleaner. That gave it a competitive edge for decades, even as the industry was facing pressure from natural gas and renewables.
Beyond coal, oil and gas are still critical, especially on federal land.
That's a key distinction. In 2022, Wyoming ranked 8th in the U.S. for crude oil and natural gas production. But, crucially, it was the second largest producer on federal lands.
Which highlights just how much it relies on accessing those protected areas.
Exactly. And the industry has consolidated over time. The state had 14 refineries in 1981, but that's down to just 4 today.
Now, the third major mineral, and this is one that I think a lot of listeners might not even recognize the name of, is trona.
And Wyoming has basically cornered the global market on it.
What even is trona?
Wyoming possesses the world's largest known reserve of it. Trona is a mineral that's used to produce soda ash. And soda ash is a foundational ingredient in manufacturing glass, paper, detergents, soaps, even baking soda.
So why is Wyoming the global source for this?
The deposit there is incredibly pure and vast. It was formed millions of years ago when these massive inland seas evaporated. And because it's naturally occurring, it's cheaper to process than making synthetic soda ash.
So how much of the world's supply are we talking about?
In 2008, Wyoming was producing an incredible 25% of the world's entire trona supply. So this one, relatively obscure mineral, is vital to countless global supply chains.
We also saw, according to the sources, a big resurgence in uranium mining recently.
Yes, uranium mining had slowed down for decades, but it saw a major comeback in 2024. Sharp increases in global uranium prices, mostly because of energy security concerns, made Wyoming's reserves economically viable again.
So the ground beneath Wyoming just continues to be the state's primary piggy bank.
It is. And looking to the future, the same geography that makes it cold and dry also makes it perfect for wind power.
The potential there is immense.
It is. High altitude, constant wind. The Chokecherry and Sierra Madre Wind Energy Project in Carbon County is, at least on paper, the largest commercial wind facility proposed in North America.
But wait, how does this energy of the future mesh with the state's very traditional political base?
Well, that's the tension, isn't it? Construction on that massive wind project has actually been halted, partly because of political fights in the state legislature over proposed new taxes on wind power production. So on one hand, the state wants to capitalize on the resource. On the other,
the traditional fossil fuel lobby and concerns over land use are pushing back.
Exactly. It creates this kind of legislative blockade.
And this internal fight over how to tax resources gives us the perfect pivot to the second pillar of the economy: external tax policy and financial engineering.
Precisely. If they struggle to tax wind internally, they excel at creating a minimal tax environment to attract capital from the outside. This is where you see that pioneering spirit again, but in a very libertarian financial context.
So let's start with the basics. What's Wyoming's tax structure like?
It is extremely attractive to high net worth individuals and to corporations. Wyoming levies no individual or corporate income tax.
None at all.
Zero. On top of that, there's no tax on retirement income earned in another state, no capital gains tax, no gift tax, and no estate tax.
That is almost a complete freedom from state taxation on your personal wealth and capital.
It is. It's why the Tax Foundation in 2008 called it the most business-friendly tax climate in the entire country. They rely mostly on taxes from mineral extraction, which is volatile, and a state sales tax of 4%.
And counties can add a bit more to that.
They can add up to 2% more. They also have property taxes, but there are strict limits on those.
The sources mentioned a 12 mil limit for counties. For a listener who's not an accountant, what does that practically mean?
It's a good question. A mill is just $1 of tax for every $1,000 of assessed property value. So a 12 mil limit means the county can't charge more than $12 for every $1,000 of assessed value.
So it's a way to keep property taxes low by law.
Exactly. The key takeaway is that the state puts very strict, low limits on how much local governments can raise through property taxes.
Okay, now let's get to the really critical part of this. Corporate secrecy. And the limited liability company, the LLC.
This is the financial innovation that has cemented Wyoming's status as a corporate haven. Wyoming was the first state to pass a law authorizing the creation of LLCs.
And that structure shields the owners from personal liability, which is standard.
Right. But what makes Wyoming's LLC so unique, and why would someone choose it over, say, Delaware, which is the historical giant of incorporation?
What's the secret sauce?
The key detail is anonymity and asset protection. Critically, Wyoming does not require the beneficial owners, the actual human beings who ultimately own or control the company, to be disclosed in the public filing.
So it provides a profound level of corporate secrecy, a legal shield.
It is. And while Delaware is known for its specialized court system, Wyoming is known for its absolute financial privacy. And this has attracted so many companies that by 2024, the sources note that company registrations per capita were actually higher in Wyoming than in Delaware.
That is a staggering shift. So for pure secrecy, Wyoming is now the top U.S. choice.
It is, but that level of secrecy, of course, attracts scrutiny.
And potential illicit activity.
That tension is constant. Concerns were raised because entities linked to foreign adversaries have been seen exploiting these opaque rules, sometimes for money laundering.
So what was the state's response?
Well, legislators drafted bills for more oversight. And a bill specifically targeting those foreign adversaries was signed into law in February 2025. It's an attempt to keep the business-friendly climate, well, mitigating the national security risks.
And in the final act of this pioneering legislative story, Wyoming is moving aggressively into digital finance and crypto.
Absolutely. The state legislature has adopted a whole series of forward-thinking initiatives to actively encourage blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. They're trying to position themselves as the regulatory vanguard for this whole new sector.
And the most ambitious project was creating a state-backed stablecoin.
This is unprecedented. A state commission was appointed in 2023 with the explicit goal of creating a stablecoin, which is a cryptocurrency pegged to something like the US dollar to keep its value stable.
And their goal was to be the first cryptocurrency created and backed by a U.S. state.
And the sources confirm they actually did it. The state-backed stablecoin officially launched in August of 2025.
So it really reflects that long-standing legislative philosophy. If you can create a unique, legally protected environment.
Whether it's for suffrage in 1869 or for corporate finance in 2025.
You can carve out a disproportionate identity and attract attention far beyond what your population size would suggest.
And that economic analysis of this crypto future brings us full circle right back to the political heart of the state.
The equality state past and the conservative present. How do we reconcile those two legislative personalities?
The contrast is dramatic, but the underlying drive, that legislative innovation, that's the constant. Let's go back to the history of the equality state.
Give us the texture of that original movement, the 1869 vote for women's suffrage.
It was a bold move. Territorial Governor John Allen Campbell extended the right to vote to women on December 10, 1869. That day is still commemorated as Wyoming Day.
And it wasn't just this abstract right to vote, it rapidly integrated women into the whole political structure.
Right. We mentioned the first female governor, but who were some of the early lesser-known pioneers?
The sources highlighted a few.
In 1870, Wyoming saw the first women ever to serve on juries, and that was in Laramie. That same year, Mary Atkinson became the first female court bailiff,
And Esther Hobart Morris became the first female justice of the peace.
a remarkable figure. She used her judicial platform to rule forcefully and fairly, and she set a precedent that women were capable participants in the whole judicial process.
And that willingness to innovate wasn't just social, it was environmental too, which makes sense for a semi-arid state.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When they drafted the state constitution, they included a pioneering article specifically on water rights.
Which was critical for survival in that arid landscape.
It was. It established a legal framework for how to allocate and use water, long before other Western states really grappled with the complexity of the issue.
Okay, so now we fast forward. A state born from such radical political progressivism is now defined by overwhelming Republican dominance. When did that shift happen?
The political landscape really changed in the late 1960s. The Republican presidential nominee has carried Wyoming in every single election since 1968.
Every election.
A Democrat hasn't won the state in a presidential race since 1964.
That is a deep, deep red wall. What drove that shift, especially in a state that's so reliant on resources that sometimes need federal regulation?
Well, several factors converged. Primarily, the state's identity became just intrinsically linked to resource extraction, gas, coal.
And the conservative movement's platform of deregulation and minimal federal control
Resonated deeply with the economic interests of the state's dominant industries. You couple that with the state's rural character, its cultural conservatism, and the Democratic Party's platform just dropped. It stopped aligning with the core values and economic drivers of most people there.
And that dominance holds true at every level of government.
Complete dominance. Because the population is so small, the state only gets one at-large seat in the U.S. House.
So just 3 electoral votes.
Right. And currently, the entire federal delegation, 2 senators, 1 representative, they're all Republican. A Democrat hasn't held a Senate seat there since 1977.
But were there any moments where a Democrat managed to break through that barrier in recent history?
Yes. There was one significant exception. A Democratic governor, Dave Freudenthal. He was reelected in 2006, and he did something remarkable. He won every single county in the state.
Every single one.
Every one. And that election is the last time a Democrat has won a statewide election in Wyoming.
What explains a total sweep like that?
It really highlights that in a state with such a low population, things like personality, local trust, and a strong focus on protecting the state's resources can sometimes outweigh national party affiliation.
So Freudenthal was seen as a pragmatic defender of Wyoming's interests.
Exactly. He showed that while the state is overwhelmingly Republican, it's not totally immune to electing local figures who prioritize the state's unique economic structure.
So today, where are the few areas that offer any kind of competitive ground for Democrats?
There are really only 2 counties that stand out. Teton and Albany.
Teton County is Jackson Hole.
Right. It's home to affluent resort communities. A lot of residents are transplants or have second homes, and they tend to have more progressive political leanings. It's reliably Democratic.
Albany County.
That's where the college town of Laramie is, home to the University of Wyoming. So you have a younger, more liberal base there than in the rest of the state's ranching communities.
Shifting to the nuts and bolts of the government itself, what are some of the unique structural differences in Wyoming's government that reflect its small size?
Well, the structure is standard executive, legislative, judicial, but the devil is in the details. In the executive branch, Wyoming is one of the few states that does not have a lieutenant governor.
What's the practical implication of that? Who's next in line if the governor is incapacitated?
The line of succession goes to the Secretary of State. It's a simplification that reflects a desire for streamlined governance in a small state.
But it puts a lot of responsibility on the Secretary of State.
It does. They have to balance being the state's chief election officer with being a heartbeat away from the governorship.
And the judicial system is also streamlined.
Correct. Wyoming is unusual because it doesn't have an intermediate appellate court. In most states, appeals from district court go to a court of appeals before they might reach the Supreme Court.
But in Wyoming, they go straight from the district courts to the state Supreme Court.
Exactly, which has 5 justices. It reflects efficiency and a smaller caseload. It also means the justices have to be generalists, covering everything from criminal appeals to those really important water rights disputes.
And how are those judges picked? Is it purely political?
They use a modified Missouri plan, which they adopted in 1972. It's designed to balance independence with accountability.
How does it work?
A judicial nominating commission nominates judges The governor appoints one, they serve for at least a year, and then they have to stand for a nonpartisan retention vote by the public.
So it tries to take some of the partisan politics out of it.
Right. That's the goal. And two final, very specific regulatory points that define the state's internal control.
Okay.
First, Wyoming is an alcoholic beverage control state. The Wyoming State Liquor Association is the state's sole legal wholesale distributor of spirits, but not wine.
So the state controls the distribution of hard alcohol, which ensures revenue.
Right. And second, the state's approach to capital punishment.
They still have it.
Wyoming retains the death penalty. And while executions are rare, its statute explicitly lists the gas chamber as an authorized, though secondary, method of execution after lethal injection.
A detail that really underscores the sort of traditional, sometimes rigid nature of the state's legal code.
So to complete our profile of this really complex state, we have to look at infrastructure and how it manages connectivity and culture across those huge distances.
Given the sheer size of the state, the interstate system must be its economic spine.
Absolutely. 3 major interstates cross the state. I-80 is critical. It runs east-west across that whole southern corridor. Cheyenne, Laramie, Rawlins, the same corridor the railroad established.
And then I-25 runs north-south.
All right, connecting Cheyenne and Casper.
Yeah.
And I-90 cuts through the northeastern part, serving Gillette and Sheridan.
But despite that strong historical connection to the railroad, modern passenger rail service is non-existent.
It is, and that's a telling sign of the decline in public connectivity. Wyoming is one of only 2 contiguous states. The other is South Dakota, that is not served by Amtrak.
So for most travelers, it's either drive or take a bus.
That's pretty much it. And air travel, it reflects the economic centers. The largest airport, which shows you where the money in tourism is Jackson Hole Airport.
What about higher education? How does the state manage universities with such a small tax base?
The system is highly concentrated. There's only one public 4-year institution.
Yeah.
University of Wyoming in Laramie.
So that's the primary educational and research hub for the whole state.
It is. There's also one private 4-year college, Wyoming Catholic College, and then 7 community colleges scattered around the regions.
The sources also mentioned an issue they used to have with diploma mills.
That was a significant regulatory challenge in the early 2000s. They were kind of exploiting the state's business-friendly rules. But a 2006 law really cracked down on that.
It forced them to get accredited or get out.
Pretty much. It showed the state is capable of regulating when its reputation is at risk.
And finally, let's wrap up with the cultural identity. The sports, the state symbols.
The cultural identity is just intrinsically linked to that cowboy state image. Because the population is so sparse, there are no major professional teams.
So all the athletic pride falls on the University of Wyoming.
The cowboys and cowgirls, yes. And they have a literal home field advantage.
The altitude.
Exactly. Their stadiums in Laramie are at 7,200 feet above sea level. They're the highest elevation venues in NCAA Division I. Visiting teams often struggle with the thin air. It gives them a real edge.
And the official state sport just reinforces that whole Western identity.
It's rodeo. And Casper has proudly hosted the College National Finals Rodeo since 2001. It cements the cultural importance of ranching and the cowboy way of life, even in the age of crypto.
So let's close with some of those memorable state symbols that capture this rugged identity.
Well, beyond the motto equal rights, the state emblem is that iconic bucking horse and rider, which is recognized all over the world.
And the other symbols reflect the state's deep geological heritage.
They do. The state fossil is Nydia, which is an ancient fish. The state dinosaur is the Triceratops, and the state gemstone is Wyoming nephrite jade.
These selections just showcase the state's pride in its vast prehistoric and mineral-rich landscapes. What a compelling set of contradictions. I mean, to synthesize this whole deep dive, Wyoming is really a state of extremes. Extreme isolation, extreme landscapes, and extreme legislation.
It has the lowest population, yet it's geographically massive. It's defined by that Great Divide Basin and its deep reliance on federally owned land.
And it's a territory that was founded on 2 completely different historical pillars. On one side, you have the volatile wealth from resource extraction, coal, trona, oil.
And on the other, this radical political progressivism that championed women's suffrage when no one else would.
And its future really hinges on its ability to balance all these inherited factors. Its modern economy is subsidized by mineral taxes, but it's increasingly shaped by these unique financial strategies.
We see this in the pioneering corporate secrecy of its LLCs, which attracts global capital, and its groundbreaking move into digital finance with a state-backed stablecoin.
Which brings us back to the core question, the provocative thought we want to leave with you.
Wyoming, really by necessity, has always been a state of legislative boldness, whether it was pioneering water rights and women's rights in the 19th century or adopting the LLC in the state stablecoin in the 21st.
So given this history of using innovative law to maximize its influence despite its size and isolation, what are the long-term implications of this small, resource-rich state trying to carve out a new global financial identity in the digital age?
Does the radical pioneering past of the equality state ultimately predict a similarly groundbreaking, though now highly libertarian future in finance and governance? Think about that tension and what it might mean for the rest of the country.